A privileged young heir, intoxicated by his father's vast power, a man who controlled a financial empire manipulating 6 banks, believed he was untouchable. With such influence behind him, he thought he could act recklessly, trample on others, and get away with anything. However, he soon crossed paths with someone far more powerful than he could ever imagine. From the pinnacle of wealth, he plummeted straight into the abyss of disgrace. This story is more than just a criminal case. It's a haunting reminder of the limits of power and the severe consequences justice can deliver. Welcome to Crime Confidential, where every mystery gets unraveled. On November 14, 2010, Matvey Yurin was speeding along the Moscow highway, accompanied by 6 bodyguards in a convoy of luxury vehicles. His fleet drove aggressively, ignoring speed limits and traffic rules. As they approached the group-level open SI section, a silver BMW blocked Yurin's path. Annoyed, he ordered his driver to honk and flash the headlights, demanding the BMW to move aside. Yet, the BMW refused to budge. Enraged, Yurin grabbed his radio and commanded his bodyguards to teach that guy a lesson. Minutes later, near Moscow's Central Clinical Hospital, the BMW was intercepted. 6 bodyguards, wielding baseball bats, approached the car and ordered the driver to step out. When he refused and locked the doors in fear, the guards smashed the windows, dragging him out violently. As the driver resisted and punched one of the guards in the face, the beating only escalated, with Yurin watching smugly from a distance. During the brutal assault, the driver, bleeding and trembling, challenged Yurin. "If you dare, let me call my wife!" Yurin sneered. "Pathetic. Beaten and calling your wife for help? I don't care if you call your father-in-law, I'd beat him too." He then ordered his men to destroy the BMW before leaving the scene. However, Yurin had no idea he had just made the worst mistake of his life. The driver, despite his injuries, managed to memorize Yurin's license plate and immediately reported the incident to his wife, demanding justice. Arrogant as ever, Yurin assumed his wealth and family influence made him immune to consequences. At just 34 years old, he controlled 6 banks, served on the board of the Kryazhlinsky oil refinery, and led a powerful financial conglomerate. But this time, his unchecked arrogance would come with a heavy price. His father, a former deputy director of Russia's military intelligence agency, had built a vast network of connections among politicians, oligarchs, and shadowy power players after the fall of the Soviet Union. Yurin, shielded by his father's influence, had grown reckless and untouchable. But this time, he had crossed the wrong person. Barely an hour later, Yurin's vehicle was surrounded on New Abbas Street, not by ordinary police, but by a convoy of armored vehicles. A dozen elite operatives emerged, guns drawn. For the first time, Yurin froze, hands raised in surrender. When he tried to speak, stammering, "Wait, sir. This must be a misunderstanding. My father is..." A brutal slap from the commanding officer sent him crashing to the ground. The officer, his boot pressed against Yurin's face, snarled, "Who gave you permission to speak?" Yurin's bodyguards, despite their weapons, didn't dare resist, as they too were surrounded by rifles aimed directly at their heads. Struggling under the officer's boot, Yurin stammered, "I haven't killed anyone. I didn't commit arson. If I'm guilty of anything, it's a matter for the Ministry of Internal Affairs, not your unit. Who are you people?" The commanding officer lifted his boot, reached into his coat, and pulled out a card, gently tapping it against Yurin's face. As Yurin caught a glimpse of the card, his smirk faded, and his entire demeanor shifted. The words printed on it were unmistakable. Federal Security Service of Russia, FSB. Shortly after his arrest, Yurin was transferred to Lefortovo prison, a facility known for detaining political prisoners under FSB jurisdiction. Compared to standard Russian prisons, Lefortovo offered better conditions, especially for educated inmates. This only fed Yurin's arrogance, as he assumed the officers knew exactly who he was and wouldn't dare harm him. He believed that if anything serious happened, his influential family would retaliate and no one would risk taking responsibility. During the interrogation, Urine remained indifferent, almost dismissive. His past brushes with the law had taught him a simple strategy: blame others. Once again, he crafted a wildly fabricated story to shift the blame off himself. He claimed that his convoy had been driving alongside the BMW when the driver, displeased with their slow pace, attempted to overtake them. As the BMW sped up and changed lanes, it allegedly posed a danger to Urine's vehicle. Although Urine himself had no intention of reacting, his bodyguards supposedly couldn't tolerate the reckless driving. Acting on their own accord, despite Urine's pleas for restraint, they allegedly stopped the BMW and assaulted the driver with baseball bats. Urine insisted he had tried to intervene, but, being smaller in stature, couldn't physically stop his 6 powerful bodyguards from escalating the situation. Tragically, the BMW driver sustained a severe head injury, an outcome Urine claimed he never desired. He painted himself as a well-intentioned victim of his bodyguard's excessive zeal. The story was pure fiction. Yet Urine masterfully played the victim, portraying himself as a man of integrity attempting to prevent violence. However, this time, his usual tactics failed. The investigators had received strict orders from above. He was to be held accountable, no exceptions. When his attempt to deflect blame failed, Urine shifted to his next strategy: bribery. He believed that with enough money, every problem could be solved. He discreetly offered large sums to the investigators, confident that his wealth would secure his release as it had in the past. But this time was different. The investigators, unmoved by his financial offers, firmly rejected every attempt at bribery. For the first time, Urine felt genuine confusion. Why wasn't money working? What had changed? Realizing that cash alone wouldn't solve the problem, Urine turned to Plan B, leveraging his family connections. He reached out to his father, the former deputy director of Russia's military intelligence, a man who had always shielded him from consequences. But to his shock, this time his father's response was cold and firm. Confess the truth. Cooperation will bring leniency. Those words hit Urine like a bucket of ice water. For the first time, he grasped a harsh reality. Power and wealth couldn't always buy freedom. 3 months passed. Urine was still behind bars. Fear began to creep in. Worse yet, his 6 bodyguards had already been convicted and sentenced. What troubled Urine most was his inability to understand why his influence was failing. With his wealth and family legacy, the situation should have been easily resolved. But this time, things felt different. Had he unknowingly crossed someone even more powerful? If so, why would such a figure be driving alone without bodyguards? These unsettling thoughts haunted him as the months dragged on. By February 2011, the silence finally broke. Urine was summoned for his trial at the Kivo District Court in Moscow. Convinced that superior legal representation could turn the tide, he spared no expense, hiring a team of Russia's top defense attorneys. With his elite legal team assembled, Urine was certain victory was within his grasp. However, as soon as the trial began, a shocking twist unfolded. The BMW driver, the victim of the attack, was nowhere to be found. Urine and his legal team were forced to argue before the court without the victim's presence. Despite their most aggressive efforts, the outcome was not in Urine's favor. The court found him guilty of intentional assault, public disorder, falsifying vehicle documents, and property destruction. On April 15, 2011, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The verdict left Urine stunned. All the strategies, testimonies, and legal maneuvering had failed to secure his acquittal. Something felt off. There had to be a deeper, hidden motive behind this relentless pursuit. At this point, admitting guilt and serving the 3-year sentence would have been the wiser choice, allowing him to return to his life of luxury once the term ended. But Urine wasn't one to accept defeat so easily. Convinced that wealth and influence could still buy his freedom, he refused to accept the court's decision and maintained his innocence. Upon returning to his cell, Urin immediately contacted his elite legal team, assembling a powerhouse defense for an appeal. His lawyers began compiling documents and evidence, determined to overturn the verdict. However, just as the appeal was filed, an unexpected notification arrived. A retrial had been scheduled. Initially, Urin believed this was a fortunate opportunity for a reduced sentence, but as he examined the details, a chilling realization struck him. This hearing wasn't to lessen his punishment. It was aimed at increasing it. Before Urin's appeal could even be processed, the Moscow prosecutor's office had filed a formal request with the higher court to extend his sentence, arguing that 3 years behind bars was far too lenient. They feared public backlash if such a light punishment for a high-profile figure became public knowledge. While awaiting the appeal hearing, Urin remained in Lefortovo prison, where conditions were still tolerable, fueling his belief that he could still negotiate his way out of this mess. But that illusion was about to be shattered. Suddenly, prison authorities ordered his transfer to Butyrka prison, Russia's most notorious and brutal detention center, reserved for the most dangerous criminals and societal outcasts. What Urin experienced there was nothing short of nightmarish. The prison was overcrowded, with inmates forced to take turns sleeping on shared bunks. The air reeked of despair, and violence was a daily occurrence. Some prisoners were chained to walls and subjected to unspeakable abuse. For a man like Urin, who had grown up surrounded by wealth and privilege, the conditions were a psychological and physical torment unlike anything he had ever faced. As if the inhumane environment wasn't enough, Urin soon found himself targeted by the guards. His every move was scrutinized, and he faced 54 disciplinary actions during his time at Butyrka, often without explanation. Every punishment left him more confused and frustrated, wondering why he was being treated so harshly. Additionally, Urin accumulated 29 official violations of the prison's internal rules, completely disqualifying him from any chance of parole under Russian law. His hopes of early release crumbled, leaving him trapped in a downward spiral of despair. By November 2011, his appeal trial finally took place. However, instead of securing a lighter sentence, the court did the unthinkable. It increased his sentence from 3 years to 4.5 years in prison. Stunned and enraged, Urin once again filed for an appeal, determined to fight what he perceived as injustice. Yet, he failed to realize that his defiant attitude was only digging a deeper hole. Behind the scenes, the Moscow prosecutor's office had shifted its focus toward dismantling Urin's entire financial empire. Their investigation uncovered widespread stock fraud and financial manipulation within the banks he controlled. Within a month, the licenses of all 6 banks were revoked, pushing him to the brink of bankruptcy. Former business allies, once eager to be associated with his wealth and influence, began to sever ties, unwilling to risk association with a man now marked for disgrace. But Urin's nightmare was far from over. A deeper investigation revealed that prior to his imprisonment, he had embezzled massive amounts of public funds. This discovery shattered any remaining hope of redemption. Just a month before the violent incident that led to his arrest, the Central Bank of Moscow had audited his financial institutions, but had found no irregularities. However, in light of the new evidence, those earlier reports were re-examined, and a flood of financial crimes surfaced. His fortune and his once unshakable reputation had completely collapsed. By March 2013, Urin's third trial concluded with yet another harsh outcome. His sentence was extended by an additional 3 years, raising his total prison time to 7.5 years. For someone who had once lived a life of unimaginable luxury, this escalation was a devastating blow. As the months passed, each harsher ruling broke him down further. Yet, Urin's stubborn nature refused to accept defeat. He persisted with his appeals, but this time, even Russia's Supreme Court grew weary of his baseless legal challenges. By February 2015, Urin's case was transferred to a higher court, not by chance, but as a calculated move to apply maximum pressure. The court deliberately delayed the proceedings, forcing him to endure the psychological strain of prolonged imprisonment. Meanwhile, prosecutors presented new evidence. His banks had continued large-scale money laundering operations, even while he was behind bars. Following his fourth trial, the court handed down yet another blow. 1 more year added on to his sentence, raising the total to 8.5 years. This marked the definitive end of Matvei Urin's legal battle. What was most telling, however, wasn't Urin's surrender. It was the fact that all his lawyers had abandoned him. One by one, his defense team resigned, refusing to represent a client so toxic. His relentless appeals had become an exercise in futility, and now no one was willing to fight his losing battle. From a powerful, untouchable figure of wealth and influence, Matvei Urin was reduced to a disgraced criminal, stripped of his fortune and freedom. When he was transferred to Tambov prison number 3 to serve the remainder of his sentence, Urin thought he had hit rock bottom. But the worst was yet to come. It was here, in the cold isolation of his cell, that he discovered the shocking truth. The man he had attacked that fateful day was none other than the son-in-law of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The revelation left Urin speechless. Why would someone so important be driving alone without bodyguards or security? Had he known the victim's true identity, he would never have dared. But that perhaps was the ultimate lesson. True power doesn't need to flaunt itself. The man he had assaulted was Jorrit Joost Fossen, a Dutch businessman born on February 24, 1980. Fossen, widely believed to be married to Putin's eldest daughter, Maria Vorontsova, came from humble beginnings. His father was an obscure artist, and Fossen himself studied design in college, working as a regular employee after graduation. Everything changed in the 2005 law, when Fossen met Maria. Her family was notoriously private, but their relationship quickly blossomed. Within a year, Fossen relocated to Russia with Maria, where he was quietly integrated into Putin's circle of influence. Soon after, Fossen was placed in senior executive roles within state-controlled enterprises, rapidly climbing the corporate ladder after marrying into Russia's most powerful family. At one point, he was elevated to a senior leadership position within Gazprom, one of Russia's largest energy firms. Yet, unlike Urin, Fossen remained humble and unassuming, traits that reportedly earned him great respect from Putin. The couple rarely made public appearances and often traveled without security or personal drivers, a stark contrast to Urin's ostentatious displays of wealth. Ironically, this modesty was what led to the brutal altercation. Fossen was simply driving by the rules when Urin, blinded by arrogance, decided to make him a target. The consequences of Urin's reckless violence were catastrophic. Beating the son-in-law of a world leader was not just a crime, it was a direct challenge to the state's authority. The Russian government made an example of Urin, severely punishing him, to reinforce the rule of law and send a message. No amount of wealth or influence can place you above justice. Despite his downfall, Matvei Urin experienced a rare stroke of luck amid his tragedy. During his imprisonment, Russia implemented legal reforms that counted each day of pre-trial detention as 1.5 days toward his sentence. This legal adjustment significantly shortened Urin's time behind bars, ultimately allowing him to be released in 2018. However, the world he returned to had completely changed. His once mighty business empire had crumbled, and he was left burdened with massive debt. Once a billionaire, Urin was now reduced to financial ruin, stripped of his fortune and influence. Desperate, he began plotting an escape abroad, but Russian authorities had already taken extensive measures to block any chance of fleeing down the country. By March 2023, the courts officially banned Matvei Urin from leaving Russia until he completed the bankruptcy process. Still defiant, Urin continued to file appeals, but the court extended his bankruptcy proceedings until April 10, 2024. In fact, it's highly likely this deadline will be prolonged indefinitely as his debts appear insurmountable. This legal trap ensures that Urin may never fully regain his freedom, condemned to live the rest of his life under constant scrutiny, disgrace, and financial ruin. Meanwhile, others thrived from his downfall. Vladimir Kolokoltsev, the official who led Urin's arrest, experienced a meteoric rise. By 2018, he was appointed Minister of Internal Affairs by President Putin himself. Kolokoltsev frequently cited Urin's arrest as a prime example of Russia's zero-tolerance approach to crime, emphasizing that no one stands above the law. Looking back at the entire saga, Matvey Urin's fate feels like the inevitable price of arrogance and recklessness. In 2013, a similar incident occurred when a wealthy figure attacked someone in public, yet the victim was an ordinary citizen, and the case barely made headlines. Urin once defended his actions, claiming it was simply a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But considering how severely he was punished, one must wonder, would the outcome have been this severe if the victim hadn't been Fasin, the son-in-law of President Putin? If the victim had been just another everyday citizen, would the sentence have been so extreme? And the most haunting question, was Urin's downfall solely the result of his unchecked arrogance, or was it part of a more complex political power play? Ultimately, this is the price of unchecked ego, disregarding the law and belittling human dignity. A costly lesson for anyone who believes that wealth and influence can conceal all sins. But is this truly justice kak for all, or was it simply retribution fought from a greater power? Matvey Urin's story serves as a powerful reminder. No one is above the law. Wealth and power, no matter how vast, can never permanently shield one from accountability. What do you think? Was Urin's punishment justified, or was it a calculated display of power? Share your thoughts and let's discuss. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more gripping stories on Crime Confidential.